The wedding dress cost $40,000. The gun taped to my thigh cost me nothing, it was my father's, the one he was killed with. And as I walked down the aisle toward the most dangerous man in the city, I smiled, because he had no idea he was marrying the woman sent to destroy him. Neither did I know he was already 3 steps ahead. Sienna Moreau had 2 things most people didn't: a photographic memory and absolutely nothing left to lose. She was 24 when her father died. 25 when she found out it wasn't a robbery gone wrong, the way the police report said. 26 when she finally had a name. Luca Valdez. Head of the Valdez crime family. Owner of half the city's waterfront property, 3 luxury hotels, and, according to the people who knew where to look, the underground network that ran weapons, money, and silence across the eastern seaboard like a well-oiled machine. He was 34. Unmarried. Ruthless. And, according to every photograph she'd ever found, startlingly, unfairly, almost offensively handsome. That last detail was irrelevant. She reminded herself of that frequently. Sienna had spent 18 months building her cover. A new name, a new history, a new version of herself carefully constructed and road-tested. She infiltrated the Valdez social circle through a gallery opening. She was an art consultant now, on paper, and worked her way inward with the patience of someone who had nothing waiting for her on the other side of revenge. She was 3 weeks from getting close enough to matter when the plan changed completely. Luca Valdez's grandmother called her personally. "I've chosen you," the old woman said, in a voice like iron wrapped in velvet. "For my grandson. The wedding will be in 60 days. Sienna sat very still for a long moment. Then she said yes. Because here was the thing about being chosen as the bride of a mafia boss: it put you inside the walls. Inside the house. Inside the life. 60 days as his fiancée would give her more access than 18 months of careful maneuvering from the outside ever could. She wasn't marrying him. She was infiltrating him. The gun was always the backup plan. She preferred the documents, financial records, criminal correspondence, the kind of evidence that would bring the entire Valdez empire down from the inside and let the law finish what she couldn't bring herself to do alone. That was the plan. The plan, as plans tend to do, did not survive contact with Luca Valdez. He met her at the door of his estate the first evening, tall, dark-suited, with the kind of physical stillness that comes not from calmness but from absolute control. His eyes were the color of deep water and twice as unreadable. "Miss Moreau," he said. Not a greeting. An assessment. "Mr. Valdez." She met his gaze without flinching. She'd practiced this. "Your grandmother didn't mention you'd be home." "My grandmother doesn't mention most things." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "She finds information more useful as a surprise." Already Sienna understood that this man was going to be a problem. Not because he was frightening, though he was. Not because he was powerful, though the weight of that hung in every room he entered. But because he looked at her like he was already reading the footnotes of a book everyone else was still on the cover of. She felt, for the first time in 18 months, slightly off balance. She hated it. She also noted it. Both responses were data. The engagement moved quickly by design, his grandmother's design, Sienna slowly realized. Elena Valdez was 81 years old, walked with a cane she didn't need, and ran the family's legitimate businesses with a precision that made Sienna's accountant instincts quietly impressed despite everything. She was also watching Sienna with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. "You're not what I expected," Elena told her one afternoon over tea, in the garden where roses grew in disciplined rows. "What did you expect?" Sienna asked carefully. "Someone softer." Elena sipped her tea. "Luca has had soft women before. They don't last. They either break or they become something harder than they intended." A pause. "You came pre-hardened." Sienna said nothing. "I find that either very useful," Elena continued, or very dangerous. Meanwhile, Luca. She'd expected indifference, an arranged marriage to a crime lord who needed a presentable wife for social purposes. What she got was worse. Attention. He asked her questions, real ones, not small talk. He remembered her answers. He showed up unexpectedly in rooms she was searching and watched her with that quiet, unnerving focus, and somehow never caught her doing anything she shouldn't, which was either very lucky or a sign that he was better at this than she was. One evening, 3 weeks in, he handed her a glass of wine in the library and said without preamble, "Why art consulting?" "I have a good eye," she said. "For what?" "Things that aren't what they appear to be." He held her gaze for 3 seconds too long. "So do I," he said. She drank her wine and did not let her hand shake. 5 weeks before the wedding, Sienna found what she came for. Third floor study, East Wing, behind a painting she'd clocked on her second day, a Basquiat original, slightly off-center on the wall. The safe behind it took her 11 minutes. Inside, ledgers, correspondence, transaction records going back 8 years. She photographed everything. Hands steady, breathing controlled, 20 years of suppressed grief sharpened into pure focus. She was replacing the last document when she saw it. A file. Her father's name on the tab. Marco Moreau. She opened it with fingers that had stopped being steady. Inside was not what she expected. No evidence of an order. No payment record for a hit. Instead, surveillance photographs. Her father, meeting with men she didn't recognize in locations she didn't know. Notes in Luca's handwriting across the margins. Dates. Observations. And at the back, a single sheet that made the room tilt around her. Her father had been an informant. Not for the police, for Luca Valdez personally. A protected source, feeding information about a rival family called the Sorrento Syndicate. Her father hadn't been killed by Luca. He'd been killed for getting close to Luca. The Sorrentos had found out. And they'd sent a message. Sienna sat on the floor of the study for a long time, the file in her lap, 18 months of carefully constructed certainty dissolving around her like sugar in rain. She had the wrong man. She almost ran. Every instinct said run, regroup, rebuild, redirect. Find the Sorrentos, start over, don't look at Luca Valdez's face when he doesn't know you're looking. She stayed. Because the documents were still there, and because she needed to understand all of it before she moved. And because, she admitted only to herself, in the darkest and most honest corner of her mind, she had started to want reasons to stay that had nothing to do with revenge. That terrified her more than any gun. The wedding was 2 weeks away when the Sorrentos made their move. Not subtly. A car bomb outside the Valdez Hotel, no casualties, but a clear declaration. The city held its breath. The estate went into lockdown. Armed men at every entrance, no one in or out without Luca's personal clearance. Sienna found herself locked inside a war she had not planned to care about. She cared. She found Luca in the war room at midnight, MAPS's phones, the controlled chaos of a man managing a crisis with frightening competence. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face shifted. "You should be in your room," he said. "Probably." She crossed to the table. "What do you need?" "For you to be somewhere safe." "I'm useful here. I can read financial patterns, I can find where they're moving money, where they're..." She stopped. Caught herself. "I know how to look at numbers." A long pause. "Art consultants usually do?" "I have range." He watched her for a moment with that unreadable expression. Then he slid a folder across the table toward her. She worked beside him until 3 in the morning. And somewhere between the second hour and the fourth, in the space between crisis and silence, something between them stopped being performance on either side. He drove her back to her wing himself. Stopped outside her door. Neither of them moved for a moment that lasted too long to be accidental. "Sienna," he said. Her real name, in his voice, sounded different than it ever had before. Whatever you came here for. Her heart stopped. I'm glad you stayed. She breathed again. Barely. Good night, Luca, she said, and closed the door before her face could betray anything. She stood with her back against the door in the dark and pressed her hands over her eyes and said several things to herself that she would not repeat aloud. She was in serious trouble. 1 week before the wedding, Luca Valdez called her to the garden. The old woman was standing at the rose beds, back straight, cane in hand, and she turned when Sienna approached with an expression that had no warmth in it at all. Sienna Moreau, she said. Or should I say, Sienna Marco? Marco being your father's name, which you took as your middle name when you changed your identity 18 months ago. The garden went very quiet. I've known since the gallery, Elena continued. Who you are. Why you came. What you intended. She turned to look at the roses. I let it proceed. Why? Sienna's voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Because I needed to know what you'd do when you found the truth. Elena looked back at her. The file in the study. You found it 6 weeks ago. You knew about that too. I arranged it. A pause. You haven't run. You haven't gone to the authorities. You've been sitting with information that dismantles everything you built your grief around, and you stayed. Her eyes were sharp and ancient and completely without mercy. Why? Sienna said nothing for a long moment. Because I need to finish understanding it, she finally said. Elena looked at her for a long time. Luca doesn't know who you are, she said. That is the one thing I kept from him. I want you to tell him yourself. Before the wedding. And if I don't? Then I will. Elena picked up her cane. But if he hears it from me, there is no recovering it. If he hears it from you, that is a different story. She walked back toward the house, then paused. He mourned your father, you know. Marco was the only source he'd ever trusted completely. She didn't look back. My grandson doesn't trust easily. Neither, I think, do you. She told him the night before the wedding. They were on the roof terrace, a habit they'd built, somehow, over weeks of proximity. The city sprawled below them, lit and indifferent. I need to tell you something, she said. And I need you to let me finish before you respond. He turned to look at her. And she told him everything. Her real name. Her father. The plan. The gun, still in her possession, never used. The file she'd found and what it had done to 18 months of carefully maintained certainty. She spoke for 7 minutes. He didn't move. When she stopped, the silence lasted long enough that she started building the architecture of her exit, how fast she could reach the stairs, whether he'd. I know, he said. She stared at him. Not all of it. Not the details. He turned back to the city view. But I knew you weren't who you said you were. I knew within the first week. His jaw tightened. I didn't know you were Marco's daughter until 3 weeks ago. And you said nothing. Neither did you. He looked at her, and his expression was something devastated and controlled in equal measure. I wanted you to choose to tell me. Why does that matter? Because everything else in my life, he said quietly, comes to me out of fear or obligation. You were the only variable I couldn't predict. The only person who stayed when they didn't have to. A pause. I needed to know if you'd trust me with the truth. The city hummed below them. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. I'm sorry, Sienna said. For what I came here to do. Don't be. His voice was rough. If someone killed my father, I'd have come for blood too. We still don't have the Sorrentos. No, he said. We don't. We. Neither of them addressed it. Both of them heard it. They married in the morning. It was different than it was supposed to be, quieter inside, strangely real. When he slid the ring onto her finger and looked at her with those deep-water eyes, she didn't think about the plan. She thought about a man who had waited in silence for her to trust him, who had mourned her father, who had shown her a version of herself she hadn't known was still alive. The reception lasted 4 hours. The Sorrentos interrupted at hour 3. Not violently, not directly. But one of the guests, a man named Felix Carne who managed Luca's northern import operations, was found in the coat room with a wire. A Sorrento plant. Inside for 8 months. In the chaos, Sienna noticed something no one else did. Felix's eyes, before Luca's men took him, went straight to Elena. Not to Luca. To Elena. She filed it away. Said nothing yet. Waited. That night, after the guests had gone and the estate had settled into post-crisis quiet, Sienna sat at the vanity in their room and looked at the wedding ring on her hand and thought about Felix's eyes. She pulled out her phone and spent 45 minutes cross-referencing 8 years of financial records she'd photographed from the safe. She found it at the 46th minute. A single recurring transfer. Small enough to miss. Consistent enough to be deliberate. Routed through 4 shells and landing, finally, in an account registered to a holding company called EV Consulting. Ev. Elena Valdez. Her hands went still on the keyboard. The money wasn't going to Elena. It was coming from her. Monthly. For 8 years. To an account that, when she traced it 1 layer further, connected to a name she recognized from Sorrento organizational charts. A name that was Elena's maiden name. Before she married into the Valdez family. Before she became the Iron Matriarch. Before any of this. Elena Valdez had been born a Sorrento. And she had been funding both sides of this war for nearly a decade. Sienna sat in the silence of her wedding night, in a room that smelled like roses, with a ring on her finger and a revelation burning in her hands like a coal. She looked at the closed door to the bathroom, where she could hear Luca moving, and thought about a man who trusted almost no one. A man whose father had died in a war he didn't know was manufactured. A man who didn't know the enemy had been sleeping under his roof since the day he was born. She thought about what this information would do to him. She thought about what staying silent would cost her. She thought about a woman in a garden who had said, "I arranged it," and wondered now what else had been arranged, and why, and for whom. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text with no name. 5 words. Don't show him that yet. Sienna looked at the message for a long time. Then she looked at the door. Then she looked back at the screen and typed. "Who are you?" 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. The response came slowly, letter by letter, like someone choosing every word with the weight of someone who had been waiting years to send it. Someone who knew your father long before Luca did. Someone who has been waiting for the right person to find what you just found. Someone who needs you to trust me the way Marco trusted Luca, completely, and just for a little while longer. And then, before she could respond. My name is Marco. And I'm not as dead as everyone believes. The phone slipped from Sienna's fingers. Outside the window, the city burned quietly, the way cities do, beautiful and dangerous and full of secrets that never stay buried forever.
If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, comment and subscribe for more stories.